This is Jim Lakely, Director of Communications at the Heartland Institute and one of the many hosts of the Heartland Daily Podcast. And today we have a very special guest. Today we are going to be speaking to Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky about association health plans and also about the big news that Anthony Kennedy, Supreme Court Justice, is retiring at the end of July. So the strangest of strangest things are happening. Within 2 years, President Donald Trump will be appointing 2 new justices to the Supreme Court. And here to talk about all of this with me is Heartland Institute Executive Editor and kind of but ad hoc whenever we need him, healthcare policy expert, Justin Haskins. Welcome to the podcast, Justin.
Hey, Jim. Great to be with you, as always.
Same here. Now, what's interesting is that the reason we have Senator Paul on the podcast, and we scheduled him before the news on this at the Supreme Court that Justice Kennedy was retiring, was to talk about association health plans. Of course, Senator Paul is also Dr. Paul. He's an ophthalmologist. He went to Duke Medical School. He's, of course, and he is the libertarian in the United States Senate. He's always looking out for your rights. And he's looking at the Constitution as the supreme law of the land and not the whims of even the legislature, that it has to adhere to the Constitution or we shouldn't be doing it. But the reason that we booked him as a guest is because, Justin, you wrote a piece in the Washington Examiner last week. It probably helped that the headline was Trump and Senator Rand Paul lead the way on healthcare reform. And he shared that on his Facebook page with I didn't look up his followers, but considering the fact that he is such a hero to the libertarian movement, he probably has quite a few. And so he shared that on his Facebook page with all of his fans. We reached out to the senator and his staff, and he agreed because he liked this piece by you, Justin, so much to come on and talk about association health plans. So why don't you kind of set up this interview with Senator Paul by talking about what happened, what news happened, and why you wrote this piece in the Washington Examiner.
Right. So, this really, the association health plans it's not the sexiest topic. I'll be the first one to admit it. I'm a healthcare policy nerd. And my wife's a doctor. So there's, a personal connection to it. But this is a really exciting free market development. This policy has the potential, when fully realized, to completely transform, dare I say, fundamentally transform the healthcare marketplace going forward. This is just really exciting stuff. I just started back in the fall. President Trump released an executive order saying that instructing various federal agencies to implement important healthcare reforms. And one of those was directing the Department of Labor to create a new rule expanding association health plans to small businesses, sole proprietors, their employees at small businesses, and their family members. And what this does is it allows small businesses to come together, to group together based on commonality, which means in this case, according to the new rule, location. So if they live in the same state or the same city or the same metropolitan area or the same county, they can group together and buy health insurance as a group. They can also buy health insurance as a group, even if they don't live in the same geographic area, if they share some sort of industry, if they're in the same industry. So for instance, the National Restaurants Association, that kind of thing. And they can group together, buy health insurance together as a group, the same way that a large corporation can. And this allows them to purchase health insurance at a much lower rate than they would be able to purchase it in the small group market or the individual marketplace, because they have much more bargaining power. They can go to these health insurance companies and they can say, hey, we've got 100,000 people, 200,000 people here who want to buy health insurance. Give us the best rate that you can. It gives them a lot of negotiating power, which is a big reason, by the way, that big insurance companies opposed this and have opposed a lot of other similar reforms, because it does give more power to individuals than they have right now. So, I mean, this is a great development for freedom. This is going to reduce costs. And by the way, it resolves some of the more controversial issues that we see in health insurance, like pre-existing conditions and other problems. Because these groups are so large, the pre-existing conditions issue isn't really a problem, just like it's not a problem with big corporations now. Mm-hmm. And there are rules in place making sure that these small group health insurance plans or these association health plans, that people can't be charged different rates based on their health condition or how sick they are, if they have cancer or something like that. You can't charge them more money, and you can't deny coverage either. So this is a really great way of moving away from government mandates into a more market-centered environment for healthcare, which is what everybody here at the Heartland Institute wants. And Donald Trump, with a lot of help from Rand Paul, a lot of pushing from Rand Paul, was able to do that.
Yeah, and I think it's just like, again, in the healthcare space, Trump asked for, received, and signed right to try legislation. And the Heartland Institute has a free to choose medicine project where we kind of take right to try. We give it the medicine of steroids and take it to the gym and pump it up and get even more market choice for patients and doctors to save their lives and to make their lives better. It seems to me that this rule change at the Department of Labor could similarly just be the beginning. It's a great start to what really could be, maybe a revolution in healthcare in this country. That again, he said President Obama he wanted to fundamentally transform the United States of America. He certainly did fundamentally transform our healthcare system by making it lousy, making it more expensive and less, and less useful for people. A nice combo, but. Do you think that this similarly could just be the beginning, and that we could see something really start rolling and really fix this healthcare system through the free market?
Yeah, I'm hoping, and this is one of the things that I hope we get to talk to Rand Paul about. I'm hoping that we can expand these association health plans outside of just small businesses and their employees and their families. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that about 4 million people by 2023 will be added to this association health plan market because of this rule change. I mean, that's fantastic. 4 million people, if that actually happens, that's fantastic. But I think this could be, we could totally replace the current system with a system that allows people to join an association, any association. It could be your local church, it could be the NRA, it could be any association at all, and buy health insurance collectively, spread the costs of the sicker patients out, and end up with a much better, much more efficient system that doesn't depend on government. And I think one of the best ideas, one of the reasons why this idea is so great is because the problem that Obamacare was trying to address is, how do we deal with all these people who can't afford health insurance? They're not poor enough or sick enough to fall into Medicaid. They're not old enough to be in Medicare. What do we do with these people? How do we take care of them? Well, this provides an opportunity, if it's fully expanded, to do that. Because imagine for a minute you have a church. Church has 300 people, and the church decides we're going to get health insurance together as a group, and we're going to take care of each other. In our own little church community, we're going to take care of each other. And you know what? If you don't have enough money to pay the full price of the premium, then we, the church together, are going to subsidize it for you and help you, because that's what churches do. We take care of each other. That's what communities do. They take care of each other. This pushes healthcare back into that realm where people and communities and like-minded folks are taking care of each other, and the government is not, and people are not dependent on the government for everything in their lives. And that's what we need to do. We need to move to that model. And I think association health plans gives us the opportunity to do that, but it needs to be expanded.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk a little bit about the other topic we're going to be speaking with Senator Paul about today, and that is the Supreme Court. Obviously, it was, I think, by any objective measure, this session of the Supreme Court has probably been the best for conservatives, maybe in a generation.
Christmas in June.
Yeah, Christmas
in June for free market people.
That's
Absolutely.
right.
Yeah, because by and large, the court sided with liberty, sided with the Constitution, incited against more government power and intrusion, from the Masterpiece Cake Shop decision to Janus, which of course empowered Mark Janus, a public sector employee who did not want to be forced to join a union, and now in our great state of Illinois, that's right, not to join a public union, and now he won't have to, thanks to the Supreme Court. So it's really been remarkable. And, the left was going kind of crazy about all those decisions that have come over the last couple of weeks. And then they went absolutely insane over the fact that the big surprise announcement after all of those decisions were handed down, that Justice Anthony Kennedy is resigning from the Supreme Court. In fact, one of my favorite things, Twitter, left-wing Twitter went absolutely berserk. But one of my favorite tweets was a recording. It was the Democratic National Committee was having a conference call, and it came across somebody's phone, and they said, hold on. Oh my God, I just got the news that Anthony Kennedy is resigning from the Supreme Court. And there was moaning and there was crying, and people have just, it's just amazing. And so we are going to talk to Senator Paul about what he thinks, what kind of an appointment he would like to see come from Trump. But maybe before we get into that with him very soon here, Justin, you can even talk about your observations, on what's happening at the court.
Yeah, this is a great. I mean, I was talking to someone the other day about how we've gone from utter despair just like 5 or 6 years ago to maybe the best situation for individual free market pro-liberty people certainly in my lifetime. And you probably have to go back if we're going to be truly fair. I think you probably have to go back to like Calvin Coolidge or something to find a better situation for pro-liberty people. This is just absolutely unbelievable. We may very well end up getting 2 pro-liberty Supreme Court justices on the court, and Donald Trump still has 2 years left in office.
Yeah.
If Republicans hold on to the Senate in this next election, we might get another Supreme Court justice. I mean, this is truly remarkable. And if that happens, even just with the replacement of Kennedy, as long as it's the right person, we're in a situation now where we have the most conservative Supreme Court. Again, probably you have to go back to the 1930s or something before you could find that, or the 1920s. I mean, this is a truly remarkable period of time. And just in 2016, throughout that election cycle, it looked like it was going to go the other way for sure. I mean, it was looking dire. We were going to lose Scalia. Justice Scalia obviously passed away, and we could have had Hillary Clinton picking the replacement. And we've gone from that to where we are now. I mean, I don't think I could be happier this week. This is just the best thing that's happened in a long time.
Put yourself back into the summer of 2015, and I come to you and I say, listen, in 3 years, Donald Trump will be making his second appointment to the Supreme Court. I mean, it is inconceivable that this would happen. And actually, what this does is vindicate those, who said, it is Donald Trump after all, but the alternative is a Hillary Clinton who will appoint 2 or 3 more Ruth Bader Ginsburgs or Sonia Sotomayor's, who determine what the law is based on what their personal preferences are and not the Constitution. You called this a win for conservatives, and I think it's important to be more accurate, and that this is a win for the Constitution. This is a win for liberty. This is a win especially for personal liberty. It just so happens that conservatives, by and large, are the only ones that care about those issues anymore. And so that's why a guy like Gorsuch, and now who knows who comes up next, will be able to further, I hope, protect our individual liberties and adhering to the Constitution. And we are honored to have on the podcast today Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky. Dr. Paul, welcome to the Heartland Daily Podcast.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're here to talk to you about a couple of items, but we want to first talk about association health plans. The Department of Labor last week finalized a new rule expanding association health plans for small businesses. I know this is a topic that you have quite a bit of interest in, and in my mind, this might be the best or most significant free market reform in healthcare since maybe health savings accounts. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your view of this new rule from the Department of Labor and how you see this affecting the healthcare markets in America moving forward.
As a physician, I practiced medicine for nearly 20 years, and it wasn't a perfect system. And, when people got around to saying, oh, we need to do something about it, I kept telling people there's a fork in the road. Medicine's not perfect. We can decide to either have more capitalism or less capitalism. And so when President Obama was elected, we got less capitalism. We got more of a government top-down approach where the government would make all of the mandates. But as we try to unravel Obamacare, I've been for repealing the whole thing. Unfortunately, we lost about 6 Republican senators who said they were for repealing Obamacare and then refused to vote that way. So in the meantime, I've been looking for other ways that we can introduce the marketplace. And one of them is by allowing individuals to group together and buy their insurance as a group. When you look at the insurance market and healthcare and you say, who's getting hurt the worst? Well, it's individuals. It's like if you're a plumber or a carpenter or a small accountant or a lawyer's office with a few employees and you buy insurance in this very small group, or maybe it's just you and your family, if someone gets sick, your rates go up. You've got no leverage to get the insurance company to give you a better price. So you're really just sort of stuck. And it's this individual market that's gone up about 25% a year. So when you see people who say my rates are going through the roof and have doubled in just a couple of years' time, these are typically not people who work for General Motors or Toyota or a large group. They're small individuals that are getting screwed by this system. So what I've been saying is let these people join together and be like a group. And so you can imagine a time where, what if 100,000 individuals came together and got their insurance as a group? They'd be bigger than General Motors at that point, or at least equivalent to something like General Motors. They would be able to drive prices down simply by their sheer size. Mm-hmm. But it's even better than that. General Motors, Toyota, General Electric, all these big companies, they get to avoid the Obamacare regulations and most state regulations. And their insurance has been going up about 3 or 4% a year. So basically what this new rule does is it says, guess what? Individuals, sole proprietors, you may be an employer and employee of just one total, you yourself, and that's it. You can join an association now, and you can get your insurance with a big group. And so we think this could lead to a revolution. In fact, I've told people, I think I'd like to see a time when nobody's in the individual market and it doesn't exist. Everybody gets group insurance through a group. And really, when you think about it, historically, the individual market is a sort of an anomaly or an aberration created by the tax code. Because we linked health insurance to employment, mm-hmm. It just automatically turned out that if you're the smaller employer, you don't get as good a deal. So this would equalize it. And so instead of us, kissing the shoes or the slippers of the CEOs of these large insurance companies, what would happen is it would be more equal. If you had a million people in your association plan, guess what? The CEO of the insurance company is going to meet with you and offer you better stuff in order to get your million people to buy their insurance. So, yeah, I think this could totally transform the marketplace. I'd still like to repeal all of Obamacare, but short of that, until we get enough Republicans with spine, I think we should try to do as many of these market reforms as we possibly can.
Dr. Paul, this is Justin Haskins. I'm a huge fan of association health plans. I believe that this is the future of healthcare, future of health insurance, as you mentioned previously. How do we expand this so that any association can take part in this? So the NRA or local church groups. Could you talk about that? How can we expand this out to those associations as well?
It's probably going to take legislation. We think that President Trump and his Department of Labor went about as far as they could in reinterpreting a law from the 1970s, the ERISA law, and so they say they're stuck. But I'm with you. I would love to. Costco has 84 million members. Can you imagine if you could join Costco, if you were a small employer or just an individual by yourself, you wanted to get insurance, you could join Costco, and 84 million of you would be getting your insurance with one person negotiating the rate. You would have enormous leverage. It would transform this whole thing. And you know who hates these association plans? Big insurance. Big insurance doesn't want to see the consumer emboldened. So often I'll go up to my Democrat colleagues and I'll say, well, this is great. It's like collective bargaining for the consumer. You're letting the consumer sort of organize to have more leverage with big insurance. And they're like, oh, yeah, that sounds good. And then you'll see their aide walk up to them and whisper in their ear, but you know what? They would be exempt from Obamacare regulations. Right. And then the Democrats are like, oh, no, we can't do that. But I try to remind them this isn't really about Obamacare. Toyota's exempt already. Do they want Toyota, the insurance that Toyota and General Motors and General Electric, do we want all of a sudden Obamacare regulations to apply to them? No one's proposing that because they have good insurance, and it's actually rising. The cost of large group insurance is rising so much less than individual. It's sort of a success in the marketplace. And all we're saying is we think individuals, small businesses ought to get the same treatment as these large corporations get.
Dr. Paul, we have you just for a limited time, so I want to move on to the other big news this week, obviously, which is a very busy Supreme Court session, of course, capped off by the retirement of Anthony Kennedy. He will be leaving the court in July. The Heartland Institute is a libertarian think tank. And you, we believe, are one of the greatest champions for liberty and protecting our constitutional rights in the United States Senate. So what are you looking for in whom Trump selects, and why are you looking for those principles?
I think if I were to sum them up and embody them in one person, it'd probably be Neil Gorsuch. I've been just very enthusiastic. I just read his opinion yesterday in the Carpenter case. The Carpenter case is where the government says they can't track you by your cell phone GPS positioning without getting a warrant. And that's a big blow for the freedom of the individual, that the government shouldn't be allowed to watch us every moment of every day without asking a judge. Now, the government can still ask a judge. If they think you're a terrorist or a murderer or a rapist, they take your name to a judge, and usually they get a warrant, and they can then look at this information. But they shouldn't be allowed to look at it without presenting evidence, probable cause, etc. But Gorsuch wrote on this, and he's great. Gorsuch wrote the one opinion that was distinct from all the other opinions, and he said this, that when you do business with a bank, that I write checks from the bank and they're on my bank statement, you do not give up your privacy. You don't have to give up any of your privacy. The bank is doing this function for you, but because you use a bank doesn't mean you think everybody should be allowed to look, particularly the government, at who you write checks to. Same with Visa, same with telephone records, that these still are private. Unfortunately, the court ruled back in the 70s that these things are not private, and the Fourth Amendment does not apply to your banking records. So if we're going to get a new Supreme Court justice, I think Gorsuch was a great pick, and I'm hoping we can get somebody in that model. And, there have been these lists bandied about. I think that I don't know all the people particularly on there, but I know some of the people who have helped construct these lists. And I think if they get somebody off that list, in all likelihood, I'll be very enthusiastic.
And Gorsuch was on that decision with the 4 liberals on the court, which I think is what distinguished him.
Well, here's the weird thing: is he didn't actually vote. He didn't actually vote in the affirmative. He voted in the negative because he would have gone one step further. So I think if he were sitting here, he'd tell you the majority did the right thing on the Fourth Amendment, protecting privacy, but he would have gone one step further and he would have overturned the cases from the 1970s that said you had no Fourth Amendment protection in stuff you have on your phone and stuff, the phone records, banking records, things like that. And you're right, the liberals did rule this way, but so did some conservatives as well. So it's sort of, I would say, an intersection between liberal and conservative and libertarians, all sort of who believe that the Fourth Amendment, your right to be free from unreasonable search, is actually an originalist constitutional position. So I think it defies traditional conservative liberal labels, but would be better put as who believes in the original interpretation of the Fourth Amendment, and sort of the James Otis argument from the 1760s. And so Gorsuch, I think, took the right position. And I would say that if we can get another justice, nearly as good or as good as Gorsuch, we'll be going a long way towards, having constitutional government again.
Well, yeah, as you alluded to, that was quite refreshing to see that kind of thinking that by a recent or our newest Supreme Court justice. And Dr. Paul, you went to, I believe, Baylor for your undergrad, and you went to medical school at Duke University. And I began to do a little research and think about it. The current Supreme Court, of the 9 justices, 3 of them went to Yale. The rest of them went to Harvard, with Ginsburg going to Harvard and then graduating from Columbia University. And then the recently departed members of the Supreme Court, the late Antonin Scalia, he went to Harvard. Souter went to Harvard. John Paul Stevens went to Northwestern. And then if you go all the way back to O'Connor and Rehnquist, they both went to Stanford. And so you actually have to go back to the late 1960s, 50 years ago, when half of everyone in America wasn't even alive right now. To find justices did not come from one of those 4 schools, and the majority are from just 2 law schools, Harvard and Yale. And if you look at this list that Leonard Leo of the Federalist Society has put out and that Trump has released, 19 of the 25 potential Supreme Court justices on this list are not from either Harvard or Yale. You have Amy Barrett from Notre Dame. You have Amul Thapar from Kentucky. He lives in Kentucky, by the way. He went to Cal Berkeley. You have Timothy Timkovich from the University of Colorado. You have these people even from state schools. And it struck me, I find this as significant. And I think it might be important to have diversity on the court. And by that, I mean diversity of law schools. A judge whose education and training and personal life and even their personal life experiences diverge from the halls and the culture of just 2 schools, Harvard and Yale. I wonder, as somebody who went to school in what we might call real America, thinks about that idea.
Yeah, I think diversity of thought and diversity of backgrounds is a good idea. And I think we sometimes superficially think that diversity is the color of your skin or your gender, when in reality, thoughts are very important, and background and where you come from. And so, yeah, no, I'd like to see that. I would obviously never mandate that, but I would like to see a little more diversity. If you have so many people all who are part of a small circle, you tend to have less, I think, independence of thought. But all I can say is I want somebody who really believes in the Bill of Rights, all of it. We'll look to the Founding Fathers as to what their intent was. And I've been very happy with Gorsuch, and if we can get somebody in that vein, I'll be enthusiastic.
So, Dr. Paul, I mean, how a lot of people are very excited right now because they feel on our side of this issue, pro-liberty supporters, they feel that there's a real opportunity here to have that person get on the Supreme Court. What do you think the chances are that we're going to get another Neil Gorsuch? Do you think there's a high probability of that? Or, I mean, I'm really excited about it. I know a lot of other people are, but, it's a skeptical excitement, I guess you could say. I mean, what do you think?
I think the chances are pretty good. I don't know all the individuals that have been on the list that's been publicized, but my understanding from people who have looked at the careers of the people on the list is that these are originalists. These are people who do truly believe that we should have a constitutional republic limited by law, that we should, the federal government should be doing those things that were, expressly the powers given to it in Article 1, Section 8, and they shouldn't just be making up and doing stuff that was never granted to them by the Constitution. And so, yeah, I'm very, very hopeful, and we'll see. Like I say, can't comment on all the individual different names that are out there, but I can say if they stand up to the same standard that Neil Gorsuch, I'll be happy.
Well, Dr. Paul, I know your time is valuable, and I want to thank you for being a guest on the Heartland Daily Podcast and for continuing to fight to protect our liberty in the United States Senate. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
So, Justin, we were just talking to Senator Rand Paul. We're so happy that he was a guest here on the Heartland Daily Podcast and took the time out of his day to do so. And again, we wanted to talk to him about association health plans, which is what he's very excited about, and you had written about previously. And then we also had to talk about the Supreme Court. So let's take these one by one. I want to get your reaction. He said some really interesting things about association health plans, about how this can improve the free market's influence on access and prices. And he said, quote, "This could lead to a revolution in our healthcare system." What do you think he meant by that, and how will that work out?
Yeah, one of the biggest criticisms of association health plans I saw was from a guy named Michael Cannon out of Cato, and he's a very, very smart guy. And one of the things he said was, I don't like association health plans because it continues us down this road where we're all dependent on employer-sponsored insurance. And we don't want to be in that situation. We want an environment where people purchase insurance, for health insurance, the same way they purchase car insurance or something. And I agree with that, but I disagree with how we get there. And I think what Rand Paul was alluding to in that conversation, I mean, not even alluding to, he flat out said, this could be revolutionary. This could overturn the status quo. This could change everything. And I agree. I think if taken to its fullest extent, we could see a complete revolution in the health insurance industry where we move to away from government being involved really in it at all, other than some regulations or something, and move to a model where everyone just joins an association and buys their health insurance that way. And And if you can't afford it, then that association kind of helps subsidize it, and you figure out some way to take care of each other through communities and churches and things like that. I mean, I think that's where we're headed, and I think that's what Rand Paul was talking about when he talked about there being sort of a revolution that could come from this.
Yeah, well, he also said that he wants, his desire is to have the elimination of the individual insurance markets. He says they shouldn't even really exist. I think what he means by that is that it's kind of like, when he said that, it kind of reminded me of the pilloried Medicare will wither on the vine comment from way back in the 90s, Newt Gingrich, and he was crucified by that by the press. But what he meant was that there would be so many better choices for the poor in this country that Medicare will just wither on the vine because nobody will be using it anymore. And so that quote actually immediately came to mind when he said that individual insurance shouldn't even exist. How do you think that would come about? I think you've kind of alluded to it, but it would be better if the individual market didn't exist, because there isn't enough, an individual alone does not have enough purchasing power and leverage to drive down prices.
Exactly. And a lot of Americans, I think even most Americans, are still getting their health insurance unless they're on Medicare or something, they're still getting their health insurance from their employer. And this is what employers do. They buy it as groups. Yep. I mean, when you work for an employer, they go to an insurance company, they negotiate a rate, and they buy health insurance, and they can buy it across state lines, and they can find the cheapest deal. Individuals don't have access to that. And until very recently, until this rule change, small businesses and their employees didn't have access to that either. And so I think that the way you get rid of the individual marketplace, so to speak, the way you get rid of government being involved in all of this is to make it so it's not necessary to have them. And really, that's the point, right? Let's create a system where we don't need them anymore, because we don't want to push people out of it, just out onto the streets with no health insurance. What we want is to create an environment similar to how we have car insurance right now. Mm-hmm. There's no Obamacare car insurance market. Why? Because we don't need one. And that's the point. Let's fix the health insurance system. Let's slap a Band-Aid onto a gunshot wound. And that's what we've been doing in a lot of these cases. That's what Obamacare was, except it wasn't even a good Band-Aid. It was a Band-Aid that caused even more problems. And so we need to move away from this model completely. And I think this is a really good step in that direction. Yeah.
Well, we'll wrap up the podcast here together, Justin, by just kind of recapping what he had said about what he wants to see in a replacement for or a nominee from President Trump to replace Justice Anthony Kennedy. And he was asked this, I basically asked him this twice, and his answer was the same each time, and it was he wants another Neil Gorsuch. And I was actually a little surprised that he wouldn't say somebody like, well, I'd like another Scalia, because Scalia has decades of decisions and writings as a Supreme Court justice before he passed away, whereas Gorsuch doesn't have almost anything at all. I mean, what he's done has been very faithful to a classic or a strict constructionist interpretation of the Constitution. But it did surprise me that twice he had mentioned Gorsuch as his model. Did it surprise you?
It surprised me a lot. For every reason that you just said, it surprised me a lot because, yeah, we don't have that track record. And it was just a few weeks ago, there were people speculating that maybe Neil Gorsuch was going to flip and he was going to be the one that was the swing vote on some of these issues in favor of the liberal position. So now all of a sudden it sounds like at least Rand Paul, and Rand Paul probably knows better than you or I.
I'm sure.
He seems very confident in Neil Gorsuch, which makes me like Neil Gorsuch even more. So I think we need another Neil Gorsuch. I think we need another Justice Scalia. We need somebody like that who's going to come in, who's going to abide by the Constitution, who's going to be an originalist, and who is not going to just whatever happens to be the flavor of the week. We're going to interpret a 250-year-old document so that it means something that it never meant for 2.5 centuries. We don't need any more of that. We've had that for the past 80 years. Mm-hmm. It's time to move away from that. And right now, this is the best opportunity we've ever had in modern history for that to happen. We were this close. We were so close to actually getting a conservative Supreme Court where John Roberts, who has made some bad decisions, but he would become the swing vote. Right. I mean, that is fantastic. I mean, if we live in a world where Justice John Roberts is now the swing vote when he agrees with the pro-liberty position 95% of the time, that is just unbelievable. I mean, it really is. It doesn't get any better than this right now. It really doesn't. Unless, of course, Ruth Bader Ginsburg decides she wants to retire or something. I mean, that would make it really good. So let's hope that she has a change of heart and decides, you know what, it's time to ride off into the sunset and we can get another seat.
Yeah, for most of our adult lives, Justin, we've known that our liberty, our freedom, and the Constitution has been hanging on by a thread, by a one vote swing either way, and it could be a fact that by the 2020 election that there is actually a solid 5-vote block for the Constitution and not for the whims of legislators or whims of judges. That's a very good development.
Absolutely. Incredible development. I mean, it could even be 6. It could be 6. It's not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, this is just truly remarkable. Again, we talked about this a little earlier. Considering where we were at in 2015, 2016 for much of that, I mean, this is the comeback story of the year. It's a comeback story of the century. I mean, this is just truly amazing stuff.
Yep. Well, he's Justin Haskins. He's executive editor of the Heartland Institute. I am Jim Lakely. I'm the director of communications of the Heartland Institute, and you've been listening to the Heartland Daily Podcast. Please do us a huge favor. Go to iTunes and give this a 5-star review. I won't even just ask for 4. I want to ask for 5. Give it a good review. Share it with your friends. Spread the word. This is a fantastic podcast if you are interested in policy and in freedom. That's what the Heartland Institute does. Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to our channel and consider donating to the Heartland Institute to support more vibrant free markets, greater individual liberty, and more videos like this one.